So moving on, please let me introduce your presenters for this session. As you can see on screen, we have Erin and Stephanie from Scheer, and I would like to start with the introduction for Stephanie. Sorry, for Erin. Erin Marancana is the director for Scheer Group. Erin is a value-driven individual with more than 25 years experience in business process management and information technology alignment, strategy execution, training, coaching, and change management. He has expertise in leading multiple functional teams while meeting aggressive business objectives and is adept at addressing the ever-changing business environment, turning issues into solutions. Erin is a systematic thinker and knows how to organize people and activities into efficient workflows. Erin also leads Scheer's US operations activities and is always committed to producing results that exceed expectations. Erin, thank you very much for joining us today. And moving on to Stephanie. Stephanie is a business process senior consultant at Scheer Americas with a great knowledge of BPM methods and tools. Trained in process analysis, management, and improvement initiatives, Stephanie is detail-orientated, has expertise in project management, as well as leadership skills. She has excellent critical thinking skills and is focused on problem solving. Stephanie has experience in research environments and related environments and processes. Her experience in fast-paced environments allows her to be agile in continually changing environments. Stephanie is passionate about efficiency and excellence and strives to achieve quality results consistently. Again, Stephanie, thank you for joining us as a presenter, and I will now hand you over to Erin and Stephanie.
Thanks, Brian. Are the slides going? Because I can't see the next one.
The slides are up. Brian, can you see them?
Can you go to the next one?
I can see that. You need to go to the next one, Erin, I think.
I am on the agenda.
I don't see the agenda.
What do you see?
The title slide.
No, I've gone to the third.
I still just see the title.
Brian, did you take it over?
There seems to be an issue. I'm just going to make you the presenter again, Erin.
Okay.
There may have been a delay.
Okay.
So take that over. There we go.
Okay. Yes, okay. Sorry about that, everyone. All right, so this is the agenda for today. So first we'll talk about what is a successful digitalization and what that looks like within your organization. Then we'll talk about the top-down approach on how to achieve that successful digitalization. Then we'll talk about a bottom-up approach, and finally a combined approach to a successful digitalization. And then at the end, we will take your questions. All right, so let's talk about what is a successful digitalization and what that actually looks like. So it starts with having your processes in a process repository and really having them in a digital environment so that you can put data behind them and have them all linked together within your company. So then you can use those and have your people in your company work on process improvement projects. You can use that for change management. You can use that for training and things like that, and really tie your people and your processes together with that technology. And then in turn, that will improve your products and services for your company because you are improving your processes by connecting all of these things together in your digital environment. Next slide. Okay, so in order to achieve a successful digitalization, you will utilize BPM initiatives, and we have a bunch listed here, but where do you start, right? So you want to ask the question in your organization, do you want to start from a top-down approach, meaning, you know, creating an operating model, looking at your end-to-end, or do you want to start from a bottom-up approach and look at the process level and really the task level information in your organization? And so today we're going to describe both methods as well as a combined method, and then we'll describe some of the initiatives in detail and how you would use those to achieve the success of your digitalization within your company. And now I will hand it over to Erin, who will talk about the top-down approach.
Thanks, Stephanie. So a top-down BPM approach for successful digitalization helps an organization to define the company at its highest level. The initiatives contained therein for successful digitalization support a more innovative approach for process improvement. This does not mean, as you look at this image, that your organization must complete all of these initiatives. However, for a top-down approach, it makes more sense to conduct them in a linear fashion to drive organizational value for a successful digitalization. Now I'm going to take you through some of these initiatives to offer you a better understanding of what a top-down approach looks like. So what we're looking at here, and the first thing that you want to look at for a top-down approach, is to define your target operating model. Your target operating model is sometimes what we call a company on a page, and that allows for viewing your organization from what we call the what, not the how, but the what. What is your company doing? And this allows for then the decomposition later on of your processes. So the conversations that we're having with your subject matter experts and your stakeholders at this point allows for that very high level view into the organization and really sets the stage for everything moving forward when you're going into your BPM initiatives. So if we look at the right-hand side with this SmartWorks example company, if we look right here, we have your level 1s and your level 2s. So if one of the level 1s is develop vision and strategy, the conversation that we're having with our subject matter experts is, what do you do? Not the how, but the what do you do? So we would say, what do you do within developed vision and strategy? And they might say, manage vision and strategy, manage strategic initiatives, manage marketing and communication. And then to define the level 3, then we're asking additional detailed questions with, well, what exactly do you do for manage vision and strategy? And that then sets the stage for your level 1, your level 2, and your level 3. So then we have a really good idea of what the company does when you're looking at your top-down approach. So then now that we have defined that very high-level operating model, now what we're going to do is look at your process prioritization. And what we mean by that is one of the things that our clients struggle with is, where do we begin? How do we take what we've defined in the operating model and really get the most bang for our buck? And some of our organizations will look at their processes and say, oh, we're going to start here, except for the fact that that might not drive the most value in the organization. So what you really want to look at is defining your high impact, low maturity processes. So what we do is we take those level 3 processes that we've just identified in your target operating model, and we allocate those, and we have high level conversations with your stakeholders to define your value drivers. Now, the value driver conversations in these workshops can be really interesting because the value drivers are what an organization needs to or has to get right within the organization. So when we start out with these conversations, we can actually start out with 50 or 60 value drivers. That's way too much to manage. So what we really need to do in those conversations is really align with your stakeholders and say, what exactly do we need to do? And we normally identify somewhere between 8 to 12 value drivers that we then have to link up to those level 3 processes. We then weight those, and we also do a maturity assessment in reference to aligning all of that information. There's a lot of calculations and things we do behind the scenes to make sure that we're driving the best value, and then we're putting that information together. But what we're looking to come out of that are the high impact, low maturity processes, because what that helps us to do is to really focus within the processes that are going to give us the most bang for your buck. And that's going to help us to then move into the second initiative, which is then what processes do we need to create and capture within the organization. So there's three main things that we want to look at when we're capturing the processes. And the first thing that we want to make sure is that we want to capture them in a systematic, structured way, and we want to use a method. So if we look right here, the method that we're using, and the one that we normally do about 99% of the time, is what we call BPMN, Business Process Model and Notation. And the reason why we want to use that structured methodology approach is because whether I'm creating a process, or Stephanie is creating a process, or Brian's creating a process, you want to make sure that it is the same exact information in a structured, formalized way. And the reason for that is because you want to make sure that it's, you know, based on two. What number two is that you want to be able to do this in a cloud-based BPM repository for collaboration, because you're creating those BPM processes, or those as-is processes, specifically for your audience. What is the value that you're eventually driving for the organization? And the reason why you're doing that is, as we move into the second piece, which is to analyze the information. On that third piece, so the first is the systematic, structured way in which you're creating those processes. The second is to make sure that you're capturing it in a BPM repository for collaboration. And the third is that when you're capturing this information for your as-is processes, you're going to be doing that in an end-to-end manner to create transparency. And that transparency then will allow for future transformative change. Because what you're doing with these business process model and notation, these BPMN processes, what you're doing then is you're linking those back up to that target operating model, so that you have the full end-to-end transparency and navigation within the repository that will allow then for that transformative change. That transformative change then begins with the analysis, which is that other phase that we're talking about. The analysis then, or the analytical piece, is then to look at those as-is processes and to say, what are we going to improve? So what you're looking at is identifying improvement opportunities. So when you're identifying improvement opportunities, we're having conversations with the subject matter experts, and we're really looking at those processes in a manner in which we can say, you know, are there automation opportunities? What can we do with the roles? How can we improve it? What are our bottlenecks? What are the media breaks? Where is the process not working? Where can it be more efficient? Where can it be more effective? So that's the information that we want to capture. And the reason why we're capturing that information is because when we move forward with that, what we want to do then is create your to-be processes. So we've captured that as-is information, so you have what you're doing now. We've analyzed that information to identify improvement opportunities, and then we're going to take the information that you've captured there, and then we're going to create your to-be future state world. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the information from a data perspective, a role perspective, your functional information, your system information, and we're going to create those to-be processes in a manner in which will move forward your future state. So what we're looking at here is maybe you can eliminate some of the work that we analyzed in the as-is processes and then into your improvement opportunities. Maybe you have been talking about implementing an automation tool. So you're looking at what can be automated. Maybe you're looking at timing information. Where have you been able to reduce time and things like that? So now that you have your as-is, you've then analyzed them, and then you've taken that information, and then you've created your to-be processes. The next step, or what possible next step could be, is a simulation process or a simulation initiative. So what we're looking at here is, I'm going to take a step back, because you don't always have to do a simulation. But what you're going to do if you do a simulation is, I always tell our clients the first thing to do is figure out what your purpose is. So when you're looking at a simulation, are you implementing an automation tool? Are you going through a merger? Are you looking for the most efficient and effective way to move forward with the new information that you have? Are you looking at cycle time? Are you trying to scale? What is it that you're looking to do within the simulation. And once you've identified the purpose for what you're doing, then that's the way to move forward within the simulation. So for example, then what you're going to do is you're going to take your as-is processes, your to-be processes, and then you're going to start having conversations with your subject matter experts to specifically capture data. And what I mean by data is you want to capture frequency information with your subject matter experts. So you're going to ask them about how often does the declination path happen? How often does the happy path happen? You're going to ask them about times. So frequencies, timing information for execution time. How long does it take you to get this task done? Is there any wait times between handoffs and things like that? And then we're also going to capture costing and resourcing information with calendars. So, where do your resources lie? How much information and cost information do we have to apply within the simulation? And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to create those as-is and to-be scenarios, and we're going to run the simulation. Once the simulation is run, that's going to provide a lot of data and information that we're going to analyze. And then out of that simulation data, we're going to go back to the purpose of the simulation and align that with what was our goal. Again, are we looking at scalability? Are we looking at cycle time? Are we looking at reduction of costs? Are we looking at an automation opportunity? So does it line up? For example, one of the clients that we were working with was looking to implement an automation tool. So what they were looking at is between the as-is processes and the to-be processes that we had captured, they wanted to make sure that the to-be state was a minimum of 50% cost effective. So we wanted to really make sure that those numbers were 50% less from a cost perspective. And the cycle time, we were looking at specific numbers. So did we meet that threshold criteria for them to say, yes, this is a good investment? So that's where you want to really take your simulation, is making sure that you're lining up the purpose with the information in the simulation between your as-is and to-be to drive value for that business case within your organization. So what we're looking at next, if we go back to the original to-be process, is we're looking at creating work packages and then how we then apply those work packages to our future roadmap. And we're talking about your BPM roadmap. So can we take some of that to-be information that we created and apply those to quick wins within the organization? Can we take some of that to-be information and apply that to bigger areas within the organization? And then also, can we standardize this information from an institutional perspective? And then when we're looking at that information, you also want to make sure, I'll go all the way back to as is with my very structured and systematic approach. You want to make sure that you're doing this from a work package perspective and defining your information. What's the description of your work package? So what exactly are you doing? And then from a value perspective, what is the value that doing this initiative is going to do for the organization? Being very, very clear for when you implement that in either wave 1, 2, and 3, what is doing this going to provide the organization? And then making sure to align the information within the organization with timing, resourcing, and then even down here, aligning that possibly to your value drivers. What value are we going to provide to the organization, and where is that going to hit within your value drivers as well within the organization? So aligning that all the way from back when we were talking about the enterprise and the target operating model to our strategy and our value drivers, and then linking up to the very specific work packages and how to put those forth within your BPM roadmap. So if we take a look at the top-down approach and some of the initiatives that I just went through, what are some of the pros and what are some of the cons with implementing this top-down approach? So the first thing that we look at is that systematic value-driven approach through the process impact assessment. When we take the top-down approach, we can really see how we impact the organization because we've aligned our strategy to a focused approach with our processes. because we now have your target operating model, you have aligned your value drivers, and you specifically know where to focus within the organization with your high impact, low maturity processes. And then also you have increased transparency across the organization, because then you have that end-to-end view. Again, you have that target operating model, which is that business on a page, or excuse me, that company on a page, and you've linked that down through your decomposition of that level 3, so the how, the as-is processes, and you have that complete transparency across the organization, that end-to-end view. And because you have that, you then also have a transformative change when you apply your work packages, as well as your wave 1, wave 2, and wave 3, as you move forward within the organization for a much larger implementation of change. From a con perspective, it can be a little bit longer time to your first value, because you are working on that, excuse me, that top-down approach and creating that target operating model. There's a lot of stakeholders that we need input from, especially when we're talking about the process impact assessment and creating those value drivers. Sometimes it's just a little bit longer time to value. Also, change management can be a little bit more challenging because it's driven through top management and aligning that. And sometimes it requires a little bit higher of a BPM maturity. So that's something that you want to think about when you're looking at your top-down approach. So I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie as she walks you through a bottom-up approach. Stephanie?
All right, so Erin talked about, your end-to-end view and prioritization and your overarching business strategy, but now we're going to talk about the bottom-up approach. And that basically means starting from your task level processes. So instead of, starting from the top and looking at your operating model, we're going to start looking at processes as the first step. And we have this roadmap here. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do every single initiative linearly in this chart, but there are some activities that you can do in order to implement this bottom-up approach at your organization. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll talk about those initiatives now, starting with process mining. So process mining is a really great technology where you can plug in your applications and your software into a process mining software, and you can get a ton of data on your processes in real time. So basically you say, what is our process? So it'll show you your main process, basically the happy path, and then it'll show you all of the variance that's going on that other people are taking that may necessarily not be good for your process. So, so that's process conformance. And then you can also look at process performance, where you get KPIs on things like cost data and efficiency and things like that. So it's a really great tool to get all of the information of your processes, what's really happening in your current state at your organization. Next slide. All right, so once you do a process mining initiative, you get really great information on what's really going on, which is your current state or your as-is processes. And you can take that information and then create to-be process models with your subject matter experts. So in order to do this, you would take all of the data from your process mining and look at, what are the variants? Do we have any issues? Do we have, never-ending rework loops where, people are going back to the beginning, or, what's really going on and how can we fix that? And so through this, you can use that data and you can create your to-be model in order to improve your process. And those improvement opportunities, again, will come from your process mining. So where Erin talked about, doing subject matter expert interviews and capturing your as-is processes, and it's a little bit more of a manual type project, this is all based on the digital technology of process mining. Next. All right. So once you have your to-be process, now again, this is similar to what Erin talked about. You define your work packages and your roadmap. And this is very similar, a very similar situation. So you're going to define all of your work packages. You're going to put in your impact of those work packages. You may not necessarily be tying it to a value driver because you didn't look at value drivers in the bottom-up approach. We went straight to looking at processes and the task level and not looking at the overarching business strategy, but you can still, get an impact assessment, things like that. And then you do your roadmap. So this will most likely have a lot more quick wins because you're not going to get a bigger transformative change necessarily out of starting at this bottom-up level. But again, you can make your roadmap, have your wave 1 with your quick wins, your wave 2 with your bigger gains, and then your wave 3 with your more transformative change if that comes out of that. Next slide. All right. So let's talk about the pros and cons now. So the pros from a bottom-up approach are that you're able to monitor and assess issues and improvement opportunities quickly. And again, that's by using this process mining digital technology, because you're looking at your processes in real time. So in real time, you're seeing, oh, there's an issue in this process. We need to go fix that. Let's create a to-be process to improve this process. And then you can implement that quickly with your change management. And then another pro is your work packages and your implementation plan will be very data driven. So instead of getting information from subject matter expert interviews, you're getting real data from process mining. So the work packages will have a lot more data driven information in it rather than human emotion type information that may come out of subject matter interviews. Another pro is that it doesn't necessarily require you to have higher BPM maturity, because if you're using a process mining technology will create your process for you based on what is actually happening within your organization. So you don't necessarily have to know how to model in BPMN right off the bat, right? The process mining technology will do that for you. Another pro is there will be less top management requirements. So because we're using a digital technology, a lot more analysts will be involved, a lot more subject matter experts will be involved rather than top management, because you're starting at your task level information. You're not looking at your end-to-end organization, your overall strategy. And then another pro is your incremental improvement at a process level. So again, you can quickly go through your processes, make those incremental improvements at your process level. Most of the time it'll be more quick value type improvements and things like that, not necessarily transformative change. So now if we look at the cons, they're a little bit all connected, right? Because there's no prioritization of processes. It may not align with your strategy, missed opportunities for high impact process improvements, and manual processes are overlooked. And this is because you didn't start with that strategy phase, right? You just went straight into, let's plug our processes into the process mining and see what's going on. But you didn't prioritize. So, there may be a process that you're doing that you missed that could have a high impact for your organization, but you didn't plug that into the process mining. You started with something else. Again, process mining mainly looks at your automated processes, like your application, your software, things like that. If there's a manual process that has a high impact, you may be missing that because you can't hook that up to the process mining necessarily. You would have to do all of that manually. So, the cons mostly have to do with, you're not gonna align with your strategy. You're not gonna know the full potential of the impact that your processes will have for your improvement opportunities and things like that. And then now I will hand it back over to Erin to talk about the combined approach.
Thanks, Stephanie. So for a combined approach, so we deal with clients that are all over the place. So we have some clients that take that systematic approach to start with a top-down approach, and they systematically start out very, very structured. And then we have, certainly, as Stephanie talked about, some clients that invest in the process mining, and they will start out right with the data-driven approach from a bottom-up approach, or from just capturing their processes. So they just have a certain area that they want to concentrate on. So what is a combined approach? And that combined approach is we always have specific conversations with our clients to find out what exactly they're looking for, how do they want to start, what is the purpose behind it, and how do we drive value specifically for them within their organization. So an example of a combined approach is recently we had been working with a client, and they had a mandate that they had to capture all of their processes in their organization because they were implementing a future ERP system. So that's where we started. So it was technically a bottom-up approach, even though that they weren't utilizing mining at the time, but they really needed to start out with that very lower level as-is capture. So we just went right into as-is capture. However, what we did was for each of the functional areas, we then created an operating model on the functional level so that we kind of created a step-by-step operating model because we had to capture all of the processes within the organization. So what we did was we captured the as-is processes, and at the same time, then we started to small steps work into the operating model so that the ending result of that as-is process capture was that we had a operating model that we then needed to vet. So that's what we did. Then we worked backwards into the operating model, and then we aligned with the stakeholders to say, hey, when we worked with all of your subject matter experts, we put this information together, and then we have this operating model. So then once we did that, when they were looking at the ERP system, they decided that, hey, I think probably the best approach now is to do a process impact assessment, because what we really want to find out is where in the organization is it going to make sense for us to start? Because when we started talking about the operating model, there were a lot of people or subject matter experts and stakeholders that certainly had their hands up with, you know, start here, start there, start here. So where did it make sense for the organization to put their efforts? So then what we did was we looked at the process impact assessment, and we had workshops and with regards to what I spoke about before to define their value drivers and to look at their high impact, low maturity processes. So one of the things that we look at for a combined approach is what makes sense for the organization. How do we do that? And again, although the company that we were working with, they started out with creating their as-is processes, their ultimate goal was to create the to-be processes. So we were kind of ping-ponging back and forth between starting at that low level as-is processes, then very organically we were creating the operating model, but then trying to figure out where to start. We then popped into the process impact assessment, but then we moved over to create those processes without doing an analysis because we had identified that information from the ERP approach. So again, what you want to do is to make sure that you're addressing the client and yourselves from what makes sense for you. So one of the recommendations that we say is whether you're approaching a top-down or a bottom-up, or you're looking at a combined approach, what you really want to do is to make sure that each of the initiatives is done correctly. So do you have the right BPM tool? Do you have the right collaboration mechanisms in place? Do you have the right resources? Do you have the right allocation of skill sets? So, you know, from a skill set perspective, if you're starting with mining, you need some technology skills. You know, Stephanie said, you know, you don't need as much BPM skills if you're doing a bottom up, but if you're doing a top down, you might need a little bit more BPM skills. So really making sure that each of the initiatives, instead of just, oh, we're going to go top down and systematically have to do this, or we're going to go bottom up and just straight do it with data, making sure that you really have the right information people in place to move that forward to make sure that you're driving the most value for what you want to do within your organization is truly key. So thank you so much for your time. But what are our key takeaways for today? So what is a successful digitalization? Stephanie talked a little bit about that, and you're really looking at putting that digital technology in place to be able to capture your processes to drive value. You're looking at your products and services, you're linking that up with people, and we talked about doing that in a repository. When you're looking at your top-down approach, we're really looking at starting at that very high level, creating that company on a page to define your strategy and then linking that up with your processes for that end-to-end view. When we're looking at the bottom-up approach, we're really looking at that from a data-driven perspective, or if you're doing that mining, you're pulling in the data and you're starting out from a process perspective, and then you're working your way up. And then from a combined approach, what you're really looking at is what does it make sense for the organization, whether or not you're pulling from the top down first or you're pulling from the bottom up first, and really making sure that you have the right pieces in place that you're going to have a successful BPM road in front of you. So making sure that you have the right resources, the right tools, the right skills to really drive the value within your organization. So thank you so much for your time here today. Stephanie and I have really appreciated that on behalf of Scheer. And Brian, I'll turn that over to you in case there are any questions.
Fantastic presentation, really appreciated that. We do have some questions, and I think your colleague Chantel will be asking you them as we go through them. And I would ask the rest of the audience, please, once again, don't forget to enter your questions on the questions tab, the questions will be answered, so please use this opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Brian. Erin, so the first question that we have here is, what exactly is the process mining technology, and how does it differ from as-is mapping in the top-down approach?
Sure. So process mining technology is going to pull from linking into your technology world. So specifically speaking, when we're talking about the top-down approach, it's a more manual approach, even though you're using a BPM repository. So mining is data-driven. So you're going to link in automatically and pull out that data from what you're doing from a process perspective. So the one thing you want to be careful of from a mining perspective is that it's not going to pull any manual steps. So that's something that you have to be wary of, and then make sure that you're validating that information with your subject matter experts. How that differs from the top-down approach when we capture the as-is processes is that we're having the conversations live with the subject matter experts specifically, so we're capturing all of that information. The difference, again, pros and cons, from a mining perspective, we're capturing exactly what is happening, even though there might be multiple different variants. When we're capturing that information from an as-is perspective with your subject matter experts, our subject matter experts are telling us exactly how the process is. Meaning this is what our process, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. That doesn't take into effect necessarily what they might be doing on a daily basis when things change, which are your variants. So that's why you can pull that information in. When you go from a combined approach sometimes and you link everything together, one of the things that we do is we capture your as-is processes, meaning what is the process? With our subject matter experts, meaning all of the information, whether it's manual steps or technology-driven steps. And then we have that process. And then afterwards, when we're talking about performance and conformance with a data mining tool, what we're looking at is, do we actually do what we say we're going to do? So that's where mining can come into play with also a combined approach, is really looking at, now that we have that information, do we actually do what we say we're going to do? So there's a couple of different ways that you can look at it. So Chantel, are there any other questions?
Yes. The next question we have here is, do you use process mining also in a top-down approach, and how does that look like?
I think I actually just talked about that, but let me just take it a step further. In a top-down approach, that would be something that you can either do from after you've captured your as-is processes, as I just talked about. So if you have your as-is processes, and then you say this is what we do, or you've captured your to-be processes and said, you know, that we've now then implemented them, and then you have process mining. What process mining does is it goes and it looks in and it says, are we doing what we say we're doing? So you're capturing live information, and then you can analyze how far off are we as to what we said that we are going to do with our subject matter experts. So that's actually really interesting when we run those projects, is are we doing what we say we're doing when we've captured that information with our subject matter experts? Are we aligning, or is there a break with the variance? And if there is, then we go into an analysis phase where you're talking about the BPM life cycle, which is now we're monitoring that information, and then we can go back into process improvement if we need to tweak those process models as well. So Chantal?
What kind of software do you use for process mining?
You would use a process mining. There are plenty of process mining tools out there.
And in which step do you identify the right digital technologies?
Oh, in which step? That would actually be probably before you get into anything. So that's not really a top-down or a bottom-up. That would be a conversation that we would have with our clients as we would go into the BPM journey. So that's kind of the very first conversation that we have with our clients is, what are you using? What do you have? And how you set the stage for entering in your BPM journey.
Cool. And if we have a small company, which approach is best?
It doesn't really matter. It really matters on what you're doing. So the size of the company is not relevant. What's relevant is what you're going to do and how you're approaching it. So if you don't necessarily have a lot of subject matter experts, or you have limited time, you might want to choose one over the other. If you've already procured process mining or a BPM tool, we might then use the mining approach if you have limited subject matter experts, or if you have some subject matter experts and they have the time and they want to now be enabled. It really just depends on what the requirements of the project. One of the things that we do with our clients is we don't take a cookie cutter approach to business process management. We very much have a conversation into what are you looking for? What are your needs? What does your team look like? Do you have a BPM tool? If you do, what does that look like? What are you trying to achieve? So, and what is the value that's going to bring to the organization? So some of the conversations that we have with our clients aren't just, oh, just fix this over here. There's a larger conversation that we have with what is the value of doing a BPM project going to achieve, and why are you doing it? What is the purpose behind it? So the size of the organization is not really relevant. What's relevant is making sure that you achieve your goals and objectives. And then based on those goals and objectives, I kind of talked a little bit about that with regards to the combined approach, but really looking at what are your goals, what are your objectives, what is the value that we have to drive here in the organization, and then also some specifics in reference to the project requirements, what your team looks like, the availability of subject matter experts and stakeholders. And then based on all of that information, then what we would define is we would give you a recommendation with, okay, now based on that, we think you need to start here with a top-down approach, or that you might need to start with a bottom-up approach. So again, we take all of that into consideration with either a top-down or bottom-up approach, or we think it should be a combined approach, like the case example I gave with that one. Chantal, are there any other questions?
Yes, I have some more here. So the next one is the as-is process seems bottoms up, given that we are studying the detailed process and identifying opportunities for change. The link to the top-level strategy work is not as clear to me as a top-down approach. What role does a strategic process play in the top-down approach?
Great question. So the linkage between the as-is processes and that operating model and where that plays within a top-down approach is really providing the organization with that end-to-end navigation and transparency. So there's seems to be, and from statistics, a disconnect between a company's strategy and their processes. So what that does is it really takes the information and it links it up. And what I mean by that is when we do a process prioritization and we really find out what your high impact, low maturity processes are, part of doing that is finding out what those value drivers are. So when you have that high level target operating model and you've defined your level 1 to level 3s, those level 3s we then allocate them during a process prioritization. And then those level 3s, we then have conversations on the stakeholders, with the stakeholders, excuse me, with regards to what your value drivers are. The value drivers are then what a company needs to get right. So when you figure out what a company needs to get right, that's linking up that strategy. So there's normally a disconnect between that strategy conversation and what everybody does on a daily basis with the processes. Now, because you have to find your value drivers at that high level with your level 1 to level 3, that operating model, then you take those value drivers and then you link them up to when you decompose those processes on that level. So now you have that clear identification with what actually drives the organization, what value drivers drive the organization's strategy from that high level. And now because you've identified those, that project for process prioritization then highlights those high impact, low maturity processes, and those value drivers are now linked to your as-is processes so that you can see what value drivers are now connected to those as-is processes within the organization. So just as an FYI, that spreadsheet is huge. The information in the repository is huge. You can add all of those value drivers to every single one of the processes within the organization, and you get buy-in from those stakeholders. So then not only do you have end-to-end transparency within the organization, linking up your level 1 to level 3, which is in your operating model, but then that level 3 then gets decomposed into your how, which is your BPMNs, those as-is processes. So there's that full linkage there. And then because you have your value drivers linked into that strategy, now you know exactly what the connection is and what is the value of the organization or what the value brings for that specific process. So I hope that was clear. Chantal?
How does company culture play into the bottom-up or top-down approach?
Culture is always interesting. So let's see, how do I answer that one? So every single organization that we've ever worked with, every company has its own culture. So how does it play? It doesn't really make a difference whether it's top down or bottom up. A company's culture will always play into how we move initiatives forward. And what I mean by that is some organizations, for example, they have to have a all hands on deck buy-in. So sometimes I'll give an example from a process prioritization when we have those conversations with stakeholders and we're trying to align from the value drivers. Again, some of the value drivers that we acquire from the company are like 60. So we start out with 60 value drivers and we have to skinny them down to like less than a dozen. So if they have to have it all hands on deck, and there isn't one person who's very focused or like a team of like 3 or 4, it can take that project from, say, a week long to months long, because you have to have multiple workshops. So your culture plays very much into it. Whereas the inverse is also true, which is you might have somebody who's very dogmatic in their approach, and we're trying to make sure that the other stakeholders are brought in. So it just depends. We work with all different kinds of cultures, but it becomes our responsibility, or technically the project manager's responsibility, to make sure that we navigate those waters in making sure that we're trying to stay on budget, we're trying to stay on time, we're trying to work within the cultures. So it's not really a top-down, bottom-up, or combined. It's really making sure that we stay focused within the specific initiatives to be able to drive value for the organization. But we also want to be mindful always of what the company culture is when we move these initiatives forward. Chantal?
Are there specific criteria to decide on bottom-up or top-down?
Yes, as I stated before, the criteria would be specific within what the organization has or doesn't have, what the project specifics are, what the team looks like, what their availability of subject matter experts, and it's really just dependent. Obviously, you can't start out with process mining if you don't have a process mining tool. You can't really do process mining if you have a very manual process. It doesn't make sense. If we don't have a lot of stakeholders, or there's not a lot of stakeholder time, we can't start out with a process prioritization. So we might just start out with your as-is processes. And if you're starting out with your as-is processes is the bottom up, and like I gave that example, then we can work into your operating model. So again, what we do is we just have to scope the initiatives just to make sure that we're providing value and we're addressing the purpose and or the objective of the organization and driving value within the requirements of the project. Chantal?
Can you do a bottom-up approach without using mining?
Stephanie, you want to take the bottom up?
Or yeah. So you can use without mining, you can do a bottom-up approach. Again, you can start with doing your as-is capture with your subject matter experts. We are working with a client who they don't have an operating model. They don't have their overarching strategy. We never talked about value drivers with them. We just went straight into as-is modeling with them. And that's something that you can do. Actually, with them, we did as-is process capture, as-is analysis, and then to-be capture, and that's almost all that we did. Just those things, just doing process improvement, quick projects to really get that quick value for them. But now we're starting to talk about, simulation and mining and things like that. So, you don't have to do all of these initiatives at once at the same time, right? You can, it's a journey. You can pick where you want to start, what makes sense for your company, and then go on and say, oh, we're going to automate, maybe we can do a process mining project in the future. And then you look into process mining and say, okay, what tool is right for our organization? And how do we do a project like this? And then you set that up for a future initiative. So it really just depends on, where your company's at, and your strategy and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, and I have another question that's just come in here. Is the combined approach being implemented by any clients? And what does the outcome or result look like compared to an individual approach?
Yes, so the example that I gave for the combined approach was an actual client. So that client specifically started, as I said, their mandate was to capture all of their as-is processes. So that's what we did, was we were capturing their as-is processes. And then based on the fact that we had multiple functional areas, we created a functional area operating model for each of the functional areas, which then we then started to build their operating model from that. So we started out with a bottom-up approach, capturing their as-is processes, and then from there we went into capturing their operating model. And then from capturing their operating model, we then did a process prioritization with the impact assessment to identify their high impact, low maturity processes, meaning where to focus, because their ultimate goal was then to create their 2B processes for their ERP implementation. So specifically, that was the combined approach. So we started out with bottom up, then we switched over to top down, then went to bottom up again, and switched back over to top down. So we were back and forth, but the ultimate result was that all of the initiatives were done to drive value. So with the as is, complete transparency for the organization to really understand what they were doing. They had no transparency previously. From an operating model, we showed the linkage between all of the functional areas and what the company on a page looked like for the president. He was very pleased with that. And then from the process prioritization, you know, where do we start with the 2B processes, which really helped the future ERP implementation. And that was really what their goal was where do we start this and how to move forward with the implementation. Chantal?
What does digitalization refer to for a highly manual process? Does it refer to creating a digital twin so we can identify improvement opportunities? Or does it refer to implementing digital processes such as electronic work orders or automating a process step?
So that's a very specific question. So when we're talking about a successful digitalization, we're really talking about how everything works from a holistic perspective. So it's not just about implementing one thing, but it's really looking at, as Stephanie stated in the beginning, really looking at your, excuse me, your processes, doing that through a repository to capture from a transparency perspective, to linking that up to your people, your technology. You know, if you're looking at a digital twin, you know, making sure that you have all eyes and ears, you know, linking it into your processes, your products and services. So it, you know, could be implementing an automation. So making sure that you know what that purpose is to drive value. But yeah, it's the whole, it's the entire encapsulation of that and not just one thing. So it's, you know, your digital success is really doing it from people, processes, services, data driven, okay, and all of your information.
Assuming we follow the best practices mentioned in this webinar, what else can cause a new BPM initiative to fail? This is for both top-down and bottom-up approaches.
Okay. Stephanie, you want to take it for bottom-up first?
Sure. I mean, there's many reasons why an initiative would fail. Either you didn't have the right information. I'll talk about it from a process mining perspective. If you have a mining tool and you're looking at your variance and you say, you know, this is our current state model. This is what we're actually doing, and these are all the variants. And you know, the variants are wrong. And you know, the mining is giving you so much information. If you analyze that incorrectly, your initiative will fail, because if you know, automatically assume you know, oh, the variants are wrong, you know, we're going to train everybody to do the current state process. Well, if you don't talk to your subject matter experts and really find out why they're doing the process a different way in that variant, you may miss an opportunity for improvement. So, you know, you may miss, you know, a compliance step or something like that, because you didn't talk to your subject matter expert. You just assumed that they're doing the process wrong. I'm sorry, there was an echo. You know, you just have to be really careful about how you analyze the data that's coming out of the mining, because again, it's going to give you a lot of data. It's going to give you your process data. It's going to give you KPIs, and there's like infinite amount of KPIs that you can get out of it. You really have to be specific in what you're looking for, and make sure that you're focused on, you know, what's really important for your company.
Thanks, Stephanie. From a top-down approach, some of the things that could lead to a failed initiative is, especially for a top-down approach, you need your high-level executive buy-in. So you need buy-in and support from top management. So if you go into those initiatives and you don't actually have that support, or that support is weak, that could really disable the initiative or lead that into failure. And same thing from a subject matter expert. You know, you need that subject matter expert support from their management in making sure that they have the time and they have the right people assigned to the project to make sure that we're gathering the right information. And when we're doing those process prioritizations, we want to make sure that you're aligned within the organization. So if you don't have the support within the organization, if there's a lot of fractures, if people don't understand what they're trying to do, if there's not great communication, that could really lead to some failure from a top-down approach. So you really need to have strong leadership, strong communication with that top-down approach. Chantel?
Yeah, last question that I have here is as-is process mapping different than value stream mapping in lean manufacturing?
Stephanie, want to take that one?
I'll take that. The client that I've been working with for over a year now is a lean organization, and we've done a lot of work with value stream mapping projects with them. Basically we've basically integrated it all together, right? So the organization didn't have a process repository before. They got a repository. We were able to, in their pre-work, model the as-is processes before their value stream mapping workshops, and really have all of that laid out so that when they got into the workshop, they can, you know, print them out, put them up on the wall, or you know, share them on the screen and say, okay, these are our as-is processes, and they do, you know, their waste walk and all of these things to analyze the as-is processes in those workshops. And then they go through all of the activities that you do in a value stream mapping, where you know, they look at handoffs and responsibilities and all this kind of stuff, and then they go and they do their improvement opportunities, and they create their to-be models, and then we can model that in real time in their value stream mapping workshop in the repository. So that's basically how we were using it with that specific client who has, you know, this lean organization built into their company. So you know, we were definitely using as-is modeling as a pre-work for the VSM, and then that way they could focus on analyzing and to-be processes in the VSM. And they love it. They say, you know, it makes their meetings go much faster. They feel like they get more out of the workshops, because at the end they have you know, their Kaizen newspaper, and they have all of their roadmap mapped out for the rest of the year, and they have all their initiatives that they know are coming up, and then they can again use as-is mapping to prep for Kaizens and things like that. So it's really interesting to see how we sort of merged our BPM background with their lean organization and really integrated it within their organization.
Yeah, so Erin, I think those are all the questions that I've got at the moment.
Great, we can turn it back over to Brian.
Fantastic. On behalf of the audience, I'd like to sincerely thank Erin, Stephanie, and Chantel for a superb presentation and a longer than expected, I'm sure, questions and answers session. And I'm sure that we didn't get a chance to follow up with everyone. In the chat, you will find the link to follow up and have further conversations, and I'm sure that Erin and Stephanie will make themselves available on social media for follow-up, and I'm sure in the coming days they will be in touch with you. Thank you so much for your time, input, and the sheer knowledge that you've shared with us. And I'd like to say to the audience, if you've enjoyed this presentation as much as I have, the next presentation from Scheer is taking place on Thursday, November the 9th, and it will be given by the Scheer America's Managing Director, Dr. Matthias Kirschmer. I listened and had the great good fortune to be present at many of Matthias's presentations. One not to be missed. Please spread the word with your colleagues. So that draws us to an end at this present moment. Once again, Erin, Stephanie, thank you so much. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.